Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Cipher guide. Here, we'll take a look at her teams, her builds, her playstyles, and her premium options, so that you can leave this video as a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you need to jump around, and with that, let's get into things. Cipher is a 5-star Quantum Nihility unit with a very unique damage storing mechanic, where she can dish out big nukes, or just big nuke singular, with very noteworthy damage when coming from a support. To get into her kit, let's just quickly go through the unimportant stuff. Her basic does nothing special, and her skill is a blast attack that lowers enemies' damage while giving her an attack buff for 2 turns. A debuff application has some team comp importance for the likes of Acheron or Ratio, and you might kind of care about her own personal damage as we'll get into later, but you can kind of just get away with only basicing on Cipher if the extra damage from the skill and the debuffs just don't matter to you. The core of her kit revolves around her talent, where one enemy on the field is always marked as the patron, prioritizing the enemy with the highest max HP. You can also manually choose who the patron is by using her skill or ultimate onto a specific enemy. When any ally attacks this marked enemy, Cipher launches a follow-up attack, which can happen once per turn. But also, when anyone, including Cipher, damages the patron, Cipher will then store a portion of this dealt damage in her little damage accumulating tally thingy that's next to her health bar. The number displayed here is 1/1000th of the actual damage recorded. So, like 100 here equals 100,000, 1,000 equals 1 million, and so on. At base, she records 12% of all damage dealt, and thanks to her first trace, this gets doubled to 24% when she is above 170 speed. Her second trace also records the damage of every enemy besides the patron at a rate of 8%. This then also gets doubled by the first trace to be 16% when above 170 speed. It is also worth pointing out that overkill damage is not recorded. So even though units like Acheron or the Herda might have these gigantic AoE hits, them massively overkilling these small fry enemies doesn't result in as much tally accumulation as you might expect. You would instead want high HP enemies to tank the hits for Cipher's tally to be at maximum efficiency. So, hooray HP inflation, I guess? Yeah, not really. Anyways, how do you cash in this recorded damage? Well, by using her ultimate, Cipher launches a blast attack that comes in 2 parts. The first part uses some of her own attack, as well as 25% of the current tally, as an attack onto a single target. The second part does a blast attack hit of her own damage, where then the other 75% of the tally is spread equally based on the amount of enemies. So with 3 enemies, the true damage distribution looks like this, with 2 it looks like this, and well, with 1 of course it looks like this. This ultimate has a pretty low cost, but as we'll get into later, you might not want to be spamming it too often, as racking up a gigantic tally that results in 1 big nuke is a pretty optimal way to play her. Anyways, getting to her traces, her minor ones give speed, damage percent, and effect hit rate. Her base speed is 106, so with speed boots, she is looking at 145 speed at base, assuming no relics or planar set bonuses to help her out to reach that very important 170 speed benchmark. That 170 speed, by the way, also gives her an entire 50 crit rate. So circling back to her damage maybe mattering, she does get a lot of free stats that makes her damage easy to build for, since investing in speed also means investing in crit rate. Her second trace is the non-patron damage accumulation passive that I already talked about, but I do also want to mention here that other sources of true damage will not be recorded by the tally. So Cipher works especially not well with RMC and E1 Tribby. And her last trace, which is arguably the most important part of her kit, gives, firstly, her follow-up attack an extra 100% crit damage, and she also just casually makes every enemy have a constant 40% vulnerability debuff. For an easy comparison, Jiaoshu gives a 35% vulnerability debuff alongside a 15% ultimate vulnerability debuff. So having something equitable to that here tucked away in her third trace is kind of nutty. Lastly, her technique has some overworld utility, as it increases movement speed and gives her a chance to obtain a consumable whenever she approaches an enemy. When entering combat, she deals an AoE hit that has a special 200% damage recording ratio on it, so she gets a small jumpstart to her tally buildup, which is pretty nice. For leveling priority, despite being a support, it's not actually as important as you might think, as her true damage recording, true damage distribution, and vulnerability debuff don't scale with ability levels. But again, her damage is not negligible, and if you are using her, a secondary aim should be squeezing out any possible damage from any possible source. So for that, her talent is most important, followed by her ultimate, followed by skill, and then basic. You will be basic attacking on her for a good amount, so leveling it is not useless, but if you don't feel like maxing out her traces, then I will only somewhat blame you. So then, how do you actually play Cipher? Well, as it turns out, a lot of her utility that she brings to the team is given through her just existing. Her vulnerability field is always active no matter what, and her damage accumulation has the very difficult condition of damaging the enemy in order to be properly used. It's not uncommon for runs with Cipher better to just have her stand there, basic attacking every turn, with an occasional skill usage for the attack buff and extra damage, where she then ults at the end of the fight for 1.5 million damage in order to help delete the second phase of a boss's health bar. There are, then, two decisions worth noting in that chain. When do you skill and when do you ult? The 30% attack buff from her skill isn't worth nothing, but I would say it's on the lower end of the totem pole of skill point usage priorities. It doesn't hurt to use it if you have a surplus, but if you are tight on SP, I'd even say a high scene skill would be generally more important to get off first. The debuff application can be nice for Acheron and Ratio, but at least for Acheron, this can already be fulfilled when using Pearls, her signature, or the new Nihility Battle Pass option. I'm gonna go on a tangent about using Pearls with Acheron, so if that doesn't matter to you, skip to this time. Relying on Cipher's skill to apply a debuff has the same line of thinking as you might use for Payla's skill, in that it's most useful for when you need to bypass the fact that repeated Pearls application against the same enemy doesn't give Acheron a stack, which is then compounded by the fact that you really want Cipher's follow-up attack to apply a debuff every turn as well. So if you have an array of enemies to attack, Cipher might want to basic random enemies to spread out the Pearls application, as the single marked patron will then be guaranteed to get Pearls from her follow-up. Pearls only has a 1-turn duration, so you should be able to repeatedly apply it onto the patron enemy so long as Cipher and that enemy act as often as each other. But this assumes that she never actually attacks the patron during her own turn, which might be literally impossible depending on the fight. Completely optimally, the flow goes, Cipher launches a follow-up attack on the patron enemy, she then attacks a different enemy on her own turn, the patron enemy acts, which makes Pearls wear off, Cipher then launches another follow-up attack, which then repeats the cycle. This flow is pretty specific and inconsistent to really get down, but the general aim should be to at least try and work towards a flow like this. Imperfections are inevitable, but knowing what the optimal play is still important. This also does mean that Cipher's attacks onto the other enemies won't be recorded with 24% damage, but I think you know that generating more stacks matters a lot more than maximizing the damage from her basic attacks. Remember that you can also shift around who the patron is with your skill and ultimate, but this doesn't really do anything for Pearls application, since in skilling an enemy to make them the patron, you're also, well, applying Pearls to them. So in this, you're actually kind of forced to only use your basics so that the patron is only hit by your follow-up. All of this is to say, juggling Cipher's debuffs can be pretty complicated, but her skill at the very least can ensure that she has a debuff to apply on her own turn. This is all completely solved by her signature, and all of this also doesn't matter at all if you aren't using her with Acheron, so in those cases, you don't need to worry about any of this. Do you know what else completely sidesteps this issue? The new Battle Pass Nihility Lycone. That's right, just spend money, and this debuff application headache goes away. Anyways, yeah, this whole thing is only a problem with Pearls, but Pearls is what most E0 S0 Cipher users will be using, so it's worth talking about. But okay, the larger question is, when should you ult with Cipher? Well, I'll actually do you one better, with a how should you ult with Cipher. Using her ult sounds pretty simple at first, just ult whoever needs a nuking, but the sheer damage portion of her ultimate complicates things. First, if you want to burst down one health bar, then trying to get rid of adjacent enemies first will literally double the amount of true damage done to that single target. A cool niche way that you can do this with Cipher's ultimate is to kill an enemy with the first hit of the ult. If you kill an enemy with the first single target hit, then the second hit will be funneled into every remaining enemy. We kill the wolf with the first 25% tally hit, Hule is left standing, which means that he then takes the other 75% of the tally all to himself. This is better than if we just ult Hule, where he would then only take 62.5% of the tally instead. You could also use her ult the other way, taking single target damage and spreading it out as a blast attack. If it's, say, the first wave of MOC and you have some straggler enemies that you don't want to waste your time on, with something like a Precious Facial turn, then hitting these stragglers as an adjacent enemy of the ultimate can be a good way to whittle them down so that less resources have to be used on them. Just generally, you should keep in mind who is getting hit by this blast attack ultimate, as so far, it's the only move in the game that works like this. Okay, now we can get back to when you should be ulting. Well, in MOC, everything is thresholds based, and Cipher's big hit of damage can be used to slide under certain thresholds to shave off a cycle or two. But if a Cipher ult won't accomplish this, then it probably shouldn't be used. There's not much use out of spamming Cipher's ultimate at base. Since you are already constantly recording the team's damage, the only extra value that you get out of Cipher ulting off cooldown is the small amount of Cipher's actual personal damage that's attached to it, as well as it being another hit for Face Out and a potential extra stack generation for Acheron. But if it's the same amount of team damage being recorded over the course of a fight, it makes sense to only cash that damage out for when that damage actually matters. Take the first wave of enemies in MOC. If a quick Cipher ultimate here is the difference between clearing in 0 or 1 cycles, then Cipher ulting is a no-brainer, even if it means her later important nuke is a bit less potent. The same goes for if you need a boss to enter a certain part of their attack cycle within a cycle's action value. Take Flame Weaver for example, who spends some time after entering his second phase kinda just standing around before he enters his charging phase. If you need him to enter enter that phase within a cycle, then ulting early with Cipher to clear that first phase might be worth it. Cipher's best way to minimize potential ult damage wastefulness is to be a closer in a fight. By being the last unit to attack in a cycle that you want to clear by, she makes sure that all damage from the team is properly tallied before her ultimate is unleashed. If you ult before the end of the fight and she doesn't get her ult back before the fight ends, then all of that damage after her ultimate is wasted damage accumulation, which you do not want, as that greatly diminishes one of her main utilities. It might seem like a waste of energy to just hold onto her ultimate, which, I mean, it is, but it does also take her out of the running for CORPA targets, so that can be a nice silver lining. In other game modes, it's a similar principle, just without the cycle threshold system. You can instead think of her wave-ending utility as a means to prevent waiting for your team's rotation to start up again. Ulting the second wave boss of Pure Fiction to start the third wave earlier, so then your team might have an extra rotation of turns to dish out onto that third wave, might be better than just waiting until the end of the fight to ult. This is pretty fight and team dependent, as it depends on how fast/slow your team can clear the second and third waves, but you should at least think about it based on how your team is clearing without trying it. Overall, Cipher's role in the team is pretty simple. So long as you aren't limit testing her ult usage too much, most of her utility will just come passively from being in the team in the first place. A plug here to subscribe. By the end of the 3.4 pre-release cycle, I'll be posting back-to-back teammate tier lists and guides for Saber and Archer. So if you want this kind of content for them, then stick around. Anyways, back to the vid. Let's next get into how you build your Cipher, in which there are two main ways to go about it. You either care about her damage, or you care about her speed for the sake of stack generation for Facial and Acheron. For damage, Genius is the best against quantum weak enemies, otherwise Pioneer is best. For speed, no matter what, you want to hit 170 speed, but if you want to reach 200, which would mean 3 turns in 1 cycle of MOC, then a 2-piece speed build would make some sense. If you have 3 2-pieces, as in you also have a 2-piece planar, Cipher would have 164 speed at base, meaning that you would need an average of 7.2 speed on each piece to reach 200. This is not technically impossible, but in reality, it might be more of a case of the closer you are to 200, the less superimpositions you need from an ally's DDD to get to the equivalent threshold. With her signature, the base speed jumps to 183, or again 164 without speed relics and planars, as the 18% speed that she can get from her light cone matches the 18% speed that you can get from set bonuses. At 183, this makes 200 much more achievable, but again, DDD is the great equalizer, so whether or not this extra speed matters depends on the team. So then, for planars, neither of the 2-piece speed ones actually give her any useful stats besides the speed, so it's purely substat based and which one you want to farm based for which one to use on her. If you don't want to dump everything into speed, Glamoth is her best piece to run for damage, as she is one of the very few non-break, non-Memosprite holding units that can actually reach past 160 speed. Duran is another good option for Facial teams specifically, as for anywhere else, the ramp up time is just too slow to really recommend. Same goes for Izumo in Acheron teams, but the generic option will always be Glamoth. If you don't need a 2-piece planar and you don't care about damage, then just take your pick between Keel, Lushaka, Fleet, Paniconi, or Vonwak, depending on what the team can use. As for actual stats, you'd first want a crit damage body, or a crit rate body if the 50% that she gets naturally still isn't enough to get her around 85%. Effect hit rate body might be needed to get more consistent application for Pearls or the Battle Pass option, but doing so is rather unideal. Next, speed boots. Damage percent orb, but attack orb is marginally worse, so just go off of substats. And, well, rope is tricky. Since you aren't ulting that frequently, quickly charging her ult is not that big of a deal, but you also really don't want to have it not up when it's really needed. She's already not going to be skilling that often most likely, so her energy regen mostly just comes down to the 5 energy from her follow-up and, well, getting hit. So I would err on the side of caution and just go an ER rope, because I myself don't think her damage is worth potentially sacrificing her utility for, but attack rope can be more justifiable if the fight and clear speed allows for it. For stat benchmarks that need to be hit, her minimum of 170 speed is pretty doable with or without her signature, so in any case, this is by far the most important stat to reach. For effect hit rate, the only thing in her kit with a hit rate is her skill damage debuff, which needs about 29% effect hit rate to have a 99% chance of landing. For S5 Pearls and the Battle Pass options, you need about 55% effect hit rate, which might be a bit costly if you care about her damage. Her signature, on the other hand, has the same chance to land as her skill, so it's a lot easier to guarantee. Keep in mind that her minor traces do start her off with 10 effect hit rate, but yeah, you get the picture now that building Cipher is a bit substat intensive to get everything out of her. For light cones, I think you already know most of the options here. Pearls is the standard gacha light cone that you hopefully have at S5. It has inconsistent debuff application, but good damage amping regardless. This is the baseline for her light cones, and every other light cone should be compared to it. The 3.4 Battle Pass light cone is a better option generally, although you will have to wait 5 entire patches and spend $50 to get it to S5. The vulnerability from this icon stacks better with Cipher's own vulnerability than Pearl's. It has no application problems for Acheron, but it still has the same effect hit rate problems. And then finally her signature, which has very low effect hit rate requirements, a boatload of speed to make her a lot less substat intensive, and a total of 24% depth shred, which isn't even that much better than Pearl's. Honestly, with the battle pass option in the picture now, I wouldn't say that her Lycone is that much of a stronger niche in terms of standout damage amping potential, but as you've heard throughout this video, the low effect hit rate requirements and large amount of speed lets you better spec into her personal damage. So if that matters to you, then this Lycone is a great option. There are other options, but I wouldn't really recommend any of them. She can't use tutorial unless paired with a Death Shredder, and the same goes for Boundless Choreo, although for that and Good Night Sleep Well, I think even if you care about Cipher's damage, going a debuffing Lycone is better than something like this. For her teams, there's that teammate tier list that I've already posted, so if you want that deeper dive, there's that deeper dive. But if you want a quick rundown, Cipher works in literally every team in the game. Vulnerability and true damage are about as universal as you can get, and there is legit no team that gets nothing from her. What she lacks in are the factors that have made Harmony characters so dominant in the meta for the majority of this game's lifespan: action advances, energy, and DDD. Most carries prefer the utility of getting extra turns and extra energy so that they can do more with whatever their respective gimmick is, as opposed to raw damage amping. Cipher's raw damage amping is about as potent as it gets, but the amount of teams that actively want her is smaller than you would initially expect. For Acheron, Cipher is her best teammate by a decent margin, either when compared to Jiaoshu or especially when used alongside him. If you want Acheron to remain relevant in your account, adding Cipher to her roster is not a bad idea at all, although you do have to potentially grapple with all the Pearl shenanigans that we previously talked about. For Fei Xiao, Cipher is a best in slot teammate in the sub DPS role, assuming no min-max equal shenanigans with Sustainless Mose. But with how good of a job everyone in that role already does, it might hurt a bit to replace them. If you are inclined to replace them though, then yeah, Cipher is your best bet to do so. And lastly, for Ratio, Cipher is incredibly potent with her 3 debuffs. If you need a debuffer to fulfill his debuff quota, then she is best in slot, but she might fall behind other premium investment options that are also applicable to him, such as E1 Robin. I will also briefly mention, from the way it looks right now, Finon and especially Archer will be able to use her pretty well. She's not on the level that she is with Acheron in filling a niche that no other unit can, but, well, for Archer, she's at minimum second best for the secondary supporting slot. And for Finon, it's really up in the air how good she will end up being as the sustainless damage amping filler unit to round up his team comp. But from what we can tell, she does perform noticeably better here due to her much needed high uptime debuffs to complement the high amount of generic damage amping that's typically given to Finon. So at the very least in the short term, Cipher has a pretty bright future, and thanks to her true damage scaling, she'll always be able to nuke at a consistent rate compared to the carry that she's paired with. So who knows, maybe she'll end up having some genuine staying power in the meta over time. I'm not really in a position to confidently claim so one way or the other, but that has been a pretty popular idea that surrounded her pre-release discussion. Lastly, let's get into her Eidolons, which are actually pretty good. Her E1 increases the recorded value of her true damage by 50%, while then also giving her a constant 80% attack buff that's given from her follow-up. This is a big increase to her personal damage and to her damage amping. It lowers the threshold of whether or not her nuke is able to be that closer that it needs to be, while also making it easier to be used as more of an immediate phase or wave ender. More tally means that there's more that you can do with it, which, while cool conceptually, also makes it a bit hard to quantify. Is this support E1 on the same level as E1 Robin or E1 Tribby? In my opinion, no, but then again, most things aren't. Is this a good E1 for Cipher if you like her and you want her to be strong? I think so, yeah. If you want my quick E1 versus S1 take, I think Cipher fits into that comfortable and very crowded category where her E1 is better but her S1 is cheaper, so do what you will with that information. Her E2 gives an extra 30% vulnerability to whoever gets hit by any of her attacks. This is more typical from what you would expect from a support's E1. I haven't really illustrated this, but vulnerability by itself is just a fixed damage multiplier, so this Eidolon is just a straight up 30% damage increase for the entire team, for a total of 70% damage increase from all of her vulnerability put together. This is right up there with E1 Robin or E1 Tribby, but with it being an E2, it is much more expensive and thus a lot harder to really recommend actually going for. But if you are a die-hard Cipher enjoyer, rest assured that her E2 is very worthwhile. Her E4 makes Cipher deal an extra hit of additional damage equal to 50% of her attack to the patron whenever it gets attacked. When I said her Eidolons were pretty good, this is not what I was referring to. This is decent damage over the course of the fight, but for an E4, well, it's about as good as an E4 usually is, which is not a good thing. And lastly, her E6 gives her follow-up attack 350 damage percent. She then also records an extra 16% tally from her follow-up attack, and after using her ultimate, she retains 20% of its tally. Retaining tally is a pretty powerful tool. It's part of what makes Hyacine's damage so impressive for the support that she is. Like her E1, this tally retention more so incentivizes her to actually use her ultimate during the fight rather than just at the end. And that, plus the follow-up attack damage increase, all seems to make E6 Cipher a more fun, flashy unit, but in my opinion for E6 standards, it's more on the average side. And that's Cipher. I'll say here that there might be a bit of a pause on uploads for the next little bit, as I need to start working on content for the end of the 3.4 pre-release cycle. Saber and Archer content is upon us, and I couldn't be more excited. So, until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!